Hey guys, tonight, we're going deep underground beneath the polished jade floors of an ancient Korean palace, where the air smells like old stone wet wood and something tangy, something alive. You descend slowly into the fermentation cellars of the Goryeo dynasty barefoot on cold steps, your fingertips trailing along the walls slick with condensation. The flicker of oil lamps lights rows of enormous clay ongi jars, sealed tight with waxed paper and twine, each one quietly fizzing with time. You're not alone. In the shadows, servants in hemp robes tend the brine levels, adjust wooden lids, and scribble illegible notes on bamboo slats. No one speaks because in this part of the palace, silence is sacred. The pickles are fermenting, and they don't like to be disturbed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love seeing our sleepy little global community. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The history of Korean pickles isn't just about food. It's a trail of glistening spiced vegetables winding through time, layered with class dynamics, agricultural innovations, palace secrets, and a few quite literal explosions. Pickles, jangaji kimchi, and their ancient cousins were as vital as rice in a country where winter could last half a year, and trade routes were about as reliable as a donkey on stilts. In some regions, families buried whole crocks of fermenting roots before the first frost, and prayed to the household gods that nothing would go wrong. Sometimes it did, and the smell alone could become a household legend. Tonight you begin in the quietest place in the royal household, the cellar beneath the queen's private quarters. While the scholars argue over calligraphy styles and the general's posture in the courtyard here, the real future of the nation is stewing in silence. Each jar is marked with a strange sigil, some painted, others carved. One bears the unmistakable shape of a tiger. Another is marked with a lotus bloom in pale green glaze. These aren't just decorations. They're codes, ancient shorthand for combinations like plum vinegar with 9-day garlic or fish brine over last harvest turnips. Only a handful of court chefs knew what these meant, and they guarded their pickling secrets more fiercely than they guarded their poetry. You squat beside a particularly squat jar wide as a laundry basket and sealed with a layer of rice paste hardened into a ceramic crust. A small hole has been poked in the lid, just enough to let out gases, just enough to let the pickle breathe. You wonder what's inside. Cucumber, mustard, leaf, sea fern. Back then, they pickled nearly everything that couldn't run away, including famously a species of lake snail whose shell dissolved in the brine, leaving behind an unappetizing sludge that was, according to one eunuch's memoir, divine on millet porridge, but treasonous on the nose. Pickling was no simple chore. It was part ritual, part chemistry, part performance art. Some of the jars here have rested in place for 5 years or more. A few were so valued that they had their own naming ceremonies, complete with tiny tassels hung from their lids like ceremonial hats. The emperor himself supposedly named one famous jar Thrice Blessed Turnip, though historians still argue whether that story was invented by an ambitious kitchen servant hoping for a promotion. But this cellar isn't just about pickles, it's about power. Access to certain brines was strictly regulated. Some pickles were thought to balance the body's internal winds, others to counteract excess fire or soothe the liver. You didn't just eat them, you prescribed them like tiny vinegary pills. One of the oldest records of royal pickling comes from the early 1100s during the reign of Emperor Injong. A court diary mentions a celebrated daikon sliced beneath the eclipse moon, salted in turtle shell water, and sealed with silk vinegar. Whatever silk vinegar is, no one's entirely sure. But the phrase reappears again in a 14th century scroll, accompanied by an illustration of a woman holding a daikon like a newborn and bowing to it. You trace a finger along the rim of one jar. It's covered in fingerprints centuries old baked into the clay. Whoever touched this last might have stood where you are now, knees cold on the stone floor, wondering if this batch would be the one to impress the crown prince, or the one to make him throw a very expensive tantrum. It's easy to forget here in the hush of the pickle cellar that wars were fought, poems were written, dynasties rose and fell above your head. But these jars sealed and breathing sat through all of it, waiting. And you, tired traveler, have only just uncorked the first jar. You move farther into the cellar, ducking beneath a row of low beams darkened with age and soot. The air here is thicker, warmer, somehow more fermented, like you've crossed from history into the back of someone's forgotten pantry. Your toes squish softly against the rice straw mats lining the floor, placed to absorb any leaking brine. In the low light, the jars seem to shift, almost breathing. Each one is a time capsule, some storing taste, others memories. What no one tells you until now is that in the royal kitchens of Imperial Korea, pickles weren't just stored by flavor or type. They were stored by mood. You come to a painted rack holding 5 short jars, each with a hand-inked scroll dangling from its lid. The first reads, "Melancholy before rain." The next, "Courage for the winter hunt." Another, "Harmony at the 5th-month banquet." You blink. Pickles. For moods, exactly. You see, during the Goryeo and early Joseon dynasties, royal households, especially those influenced by Buddhist philosophy and shamanic traditions, believed that food could realign the spirit. Just as incense soothed the mind or certain melodies calmed the pulse, a well-crafted jar of pickled lotus root could settle a restless heart. Modern psychologists may raise an eyebrow at such claims, but then again, have they ever eaten cold kimchi on a hot day? The emotional pickle menu changed with the seasons. In spring, lighter sour brines helped awaken the liver. Summer meant spicy ferments to cool the fire within. Autumn favored earthy, radish-based pickles with dried persimmon or chestnut, believed to anchor the breath. And in winter, salty, pungent creations often layered with tiny dried shrimp or anchovy paste, designed to fortify the spirit and close the gates against wind. One preserved turnip recipe from the 13th century included instructions to slice on a rainy morning, while humming a prayer brine with spring water gathered at dawn and store facing northeast. Historians still argue whether this direction had astrological significance, or whether someone's picky mother-in-law just made it up and it stuck. You pause at a jar marked with the character for emptiness. Inside is a quiet, milky brine, with thin strands of pickled garlic, chive, and chrysanthemum stem. The royal diary of Queen Sasek includes a note about taking one bite after the death of a beloved hawk and finding the sorrow softened. That's one way to grieve, via crunchy vinegared flora. Not all these emotional pickles were for palace nobility. Some recipes trickled down to village families, adapted with local herbs or swapped ingredients. A traveling monk once wrote of finding a jar of joyful gourd pickles in a fisherman's home, preserved in nothing but seawater and pine needles. When asked for the recipe, the fisherman reportedly just smiled and said, "You have to listen to the gourd first." Of course, not everyone took this emotional pickle business seriously. Satirical poems from the 1500s poke fun at weepy daikon for dramatic concubines and the brine of noble complaints. One anonymous scroll even includes a cartoon of a court official sobbing over a bowl of fermented cabbage, while a goose looks on unimpressed. Still, you get the feeling this wasn't all superstition. Modern studies have shown that fermented foods can genuinely affect mood, impacting serotonin levels and gut-brain connections. So maybe those mood jars weren't as silly as they sound. Maybe the chefs of the royal court knew something we're only now rediscovering, buried under layers of tradition, folklore, and, well, turnips. Back in the cellar, a quiet splash breaks your train of thought. A young apprentice, barely older than a school kid, lifts a cloth from a small jar and peers inside. He frowns, mutters something about too much fennel, and reseals it. Even now you feel it, there's an art to this. Too much garlic and the flavor's aggressive. Not enough salt and the ferment turns sad. It's balance, like life. You begin to understand why some jars got names like patience or forgiveness. You stop in front of one final jar before you leave the rack. This one bears a curious name, Laughter in the Monsoon. The scroll beneath reads, "For when the world is wet and heavy and you long to be light again." You don't open it, of course. You can't. But somehow just standing near it, you can almost taste it bright, crisp, citrusy. And just a little ridiculous. Like a reminder not to take yourself too seriously. Even in a place where food was sacred and flavor was philosophy, someone still made a pickle just to make people smile. You leave the palace cellar behind for now, though not without one last glance at those jars humming softly in the dark, and travel uphill into the pale dawn mist, curling around temple stones and pine groves. Here, far from the pomp of the court, another world of pickling thrived, one shaped not by luxury, but by austerity, silence, and the slow turning of seasons. You arrive at a mountainside monastery, its eaves bowed with age, its roof tiles dripping from an overnight rain. The year is somewhere around the mid-1100s. A bell tolls softly in the distance, signaling morning meditation. But you're not headed to the shrine. You're going straight for the kitchen. The scent hits you before you even open the door. Fermented garlic, dried kelp, cool stone, something sharp and rooty you can't quite name. Inside, a group of monks in rough-spun robes stand in silence, slicing turnips so thin you can almost see through them. Not for soup, not for stew. These are destined for the Jangdokdai, the open courtyard, where giant earthen jars gather like squat little monks of their own. The monks believed in balance, harmony, and the health of the spirit through restraint. That meant no meat, no indulgence, no garlic-heavy royal pickles. Their recipes focused on simplicity and mindfulness. One turnip, one herb, one salt. Anything more would be noisy. And yet, despite, or maybe because of their simplicity, some of the most quietly powerful pickles in Korean history came from these kitchens. Recipes that settled the belly, calmed the nerves, and according to one temple logbook brought serenity even in the face of arrogant tax collectors. The monks developed unique fermentation techniques too. Instead of fish sauce, they used dried seaweed broth or mushroom tinctures to give depth without violating dietary codes. Some even pioneered a method of whisper fermentation, no seriously, that involved insulating jars with mountain moss and rotating them every full moon to promote even fermentation. Historians still argue whether this method actually improved taste or was just an elaborate way to keep the novices busy. One monk, Master Jinzong, left behind a rare scroll known today as the Calm Root Codex. It includes meditative instructions for preparing tranquil radish, which involves slicing in complete silence, soaking the slices under moonlight, and whispering a short mantra, empty sour still, before sealing the jar. Was it spiritual performance art? A kind of kitchen prayer? Or did they believe the radish could sense intention? You'll never know, but the idea sticks with you longer than expected. There's a particularly odd entry in a temple journal dated to the year 1162. Brother Namjoon pickled the yellow root too early. Sour before its time. Regret heavy in the air. That's it. No follow-up. No clarification. Just one monk, one bad jar, and one line of immortalized shame. And of course, some pickles came with strange side effects. One root, known only as Stone Whisperer, was pickled for 3 days with pine ash and reportedly induced clear dreams of ancestors and slightly tingling feet. Modern food scientists haven't confirmed the recipe's safety, and perhaps wisely no one's tried to reproduce it. But in a monastery that prized insight over flavor, maybe tingling feet weren't a deal-breaker. You move through the quiet stone courtyard now, where sunlight begins warming the lids of the jars. Insects buzz lazily. A few crows watch from a pine branch above. There's no ceremony here. No scrolls or tassels. But every jar still holds a story, some about healing, some about hardship, and a few perhaps about turning the ordinary into something quietly divine. One final note catches your attention, etched in the corner of an old storage ledger. Pickles reveal their wisdom slowly, like monks, like dawn, like you. And with that, you step gently past the last jar, turn down a mossy path lined with drying herbs, and leave the monastery behind your mind just a little quieter. Your imaginary tongue still tingling with fermented radish and the echo of pinewood prayer. You're back in the city now, if you can call it that. The capital of Goryeo in the 13th century isn't quite Seoul yet, but the streets already hum with life. Merchants yell over carts piled high with greens, brass pots clang from behind stalls, and a dog with one ear flopped sideways trots by confidently ignoring everything. You follow your nose toward a curious scent, smoky, spicy, almost floral. Something's being stirred, sprinkled, or maybe ground. You arrive at a street-side booth where an old woman is pounding something into a red powder. It's brilliant in color like rust, but angrier. Your throat tingles just looking at it. This, you realize, is Gochugaru, Korean chili flakes. Essential now, yes, but the truth is, they weren't always around. Historians still argue whether chili peppers came to Korea with Portuguese traders in the late 1500s, after the Goryeo period ended, or whether some earlier spice cousins made sneakier appearances. What's clear is that before chili's arrival, pickles had a very different flavor palette. Herbal, salty, tangy. Yes, but never that signature heat. And yet some 12th century writings do mention burning root brine and tongue-waking leaves. Were these euphemisms for local wasabi variants, wild mustard greens, or just poetically overwrought descriptions of sourness? No one agrees. Which in history means you're free to imagine all kinds of spicy mischief. Some court records suggest early experimentation with Sichuan peppercorns, which cause a numbing tingle rather than true heat. Others point to native plants like chongcho, a bitter herb that when fermented created a throat-prickling burn oddly reminiscent of chili. But regardless of when Gochugaru officially joined the pantry, once it did, Korean pickling would never be the same. It turned passive pickles into aggressive ones. It gave cabbage a backbone. It spiked quiet brines with rebellion. There's a famous legend that when the first pot of chili-laced kimchi was presented at a royal banquet, one minister spat it out, dramatically accused the chef of sabotage, and promptly fainted. The story's probably exaggerated. Most things that end in fainting are but a marginal note in a mid-Joseon ledger. Does confirm new red cabbage brine caused distress in at least 3 officials and 1 cat. Make of that what you will. The court at first resisted. Older scholars preferred their pickles white or pale, subtle things you could eat while writing poems or mourning your third wife. But the common people, oh, they fell in love immediately. By the 1600s, red kimchi was standard fare in village crocs from Jeolla to Gangwon. You pause in front of a stone wall covered in drying peppers, strings of them, fluttering in the breeze like prayer flags. The color is mesmerizing, sunlit crimson, papery and fragile, but promising intensity. You reach out, pluck one, imagine it crushed into a powder, folded gently into cabbage leaves, garlic, anchovy stock, and salted shrimp. You think back to a proverb once scrawled on a kitchen screen. A bland pickle hears no secrets, meaning you want something with edge. Something that listens, and maybe even talks back. Gochugaru gave pickles that voice. It told a story of imports and adaptation, of suspicion turned passion. And it made your nose run while doing it. Still, scholars debate the exact date of its culinary arrival. Some cling to the Portuguese chili theory. Others believe the spice slipped in via China, trading its way into markets and mouths without a headline. One theory, particularly beloved by eccentric food historians, suggests it was introduced by Buddhist monks who encountered chili during a pilgrimage and snuck seeds back hidden in their robes. There's no proof, but the visual alone is worth keeping. You smile and keep walking. The city swells around you. Somewhere, a vendor drops a jar. Someone else curses creatively. A child shouts too spicy and then half a beat later, more. This is how a pickle becomes a revolution. You slip off the busy street and into a quieter wing of the palace compound, one reserved for the scholars, scribes, and official chefs of the inner court. The paper doors are thin, the shadows long, and the scent of ink mingles faintly with sesame oil. It's late autumn. The trees outside shiver with gold. Inside, though, the table is already set with what matters most: pickles. Tonight you're a guest not of the emperor but of his favorite poet. A wiry man in scholar's robes with ink on his sleeves and vinegar on his breath. He gestures grandly to a tray of tiny, meticulously arranged pickled vegetables and says with mock gravity, "Behold salted serenity." You bite into a sliver of pickled lotus root. It crunches like new snow, but tastes like memory, clean, earthy, and just a little sweet. The poet sighs, leans back, and begins a drunken monologue on how pickles are the truest metaphor for the human soul, cut thin, soaked in hardship, and better with age. You try not to laugh, but he's right. During the Goryeo period, court poetry frequently referenced pickles not just as food, but as symbols of patience, of modesty, of the changing seasons. The most admired poems didn't boast of riches or war, but of the perfectly balanced flavor in a humble bowl of radish kimchi served at dusk. One famous verse by Lady Higeum, a royal concubine and amateur pickle philosopher, describes her heart as a jar sealed too tightly, where the brine has turned sharp and the garlic dreams alone. That's either heartbreak or indigestion. But either way, it's oddly beautiful. At imperial banquets, officials were often ranked not just by their robes or titles, but by which pickle tray they received. The upper echelons got the aged stuff, the bold complex ferments layered with rare herbs and imported salt. Mid-tier guests had the quick pickles, fresh cucumber, maybe a baby turnip or two. Lower officials, well, they got pickled bean leaves, which are fine, but no one's writing poems about them. Pickles even found their way into political metaphors. One scribe once compared a rival court faction to an over-soaked radish too soft to stand, too sour to serve. That same scribe was reportedly reassigned to cabbage washing duty the following week. And in a kingdom where the line between poetry and politics was always slightly blurred, the pickle tray could become a battleground of passive-aggressive commentary. A missed pickle at your seat. A message. A pickle with extra garlic. A compliment or an insult depending on your breath. Even the emperor himself was known to comment on poetry through pickles. One winter evening, after a particularly dense scroll was presented for his review, he supposedly waved it away and muttered, "Bring me something with flavor." A jar of spicy brined burdock was brought out. The scroll was never mentioned again. You sit back beside the poet, now dozing lightly with his head on the floor mat and his chopsticks still in hand. Outside, the wind rattles the dried pepper strings and tugs at the old paper windows. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of fermented garlic and literary ambition. You wonder how many lines of verse were inspired not by star-crossed lovers or glorious battles, but by that first cold bite of pickled perilla leaf on a snowy morning. Maybe more than anyone realizes. You take another piece of lotus root, hold it on your tongue, and let the history melt slowly into the silence. You're jolted from the palace tranquility by a sharp splash and a chorus of curses echoing through a narrow alley near the docks. You follow the noise, half curious, half drawn by a powerful fishy odor, and stumble upon a kitchen disaster in progress. Two young cooks in aprons soaked to their knees are arguing over a tub of flailing eels. Yes, flailing, alive, wet, unhappy. One of them shouts, "It has to be fresh, or the balance is ruined." The other hisses, "You'll kill someone or worse offend the emperor's stomach." Welcome to one of the stranger corners of historical pickling, where Imperial Korea's obsession with balance and health led to some truly peculiar recipes. chief among them eel-soaked brine. Now this wasn't your standard supermarket eel. These were freshwater specimens caught at night by lantern light, quickly stunned, not always successfully, and layered into shallow crocks with rice wine, ginger slices, garlic and salt water. The theory that their natural oils combined with the fermentation process would create a heat-balancing tonic for winter months. A little protein, a little funk, and a whole lot of speculation. This method appears in a late 14th century medical text on the humors of the stomach and the glory of brine. Catchy title, right? The entry claims the eel pickle warms the back, brightens the eyes, and discourages the growth of worms. Which is quite a checklist. The strange part is it wasn't always cooked. Some variants use the eel raw, salted alive into the jar. Monks predictably refused to touch the stuff. But court physicians praised its yang-boosting qualities, especially for aging ministers and somewhat awkwardly newlywed grooms. Historians still argue whether this dish was ever genuinely popular or just an elaborate culinary dare. One surviving eunuch journal dismisses it as pond stench in a jar, while another calls it surprisingly polite on the tongue if you get past the eyes. You're not sure whether that's encouraging or horrifying. The preparation was dramatic. Servants reportedly had to chant cooling incantations while sealing the jars in hopes the ferment wouldn't sour too quickly. Some even used embroidered cloths tied around the lids to calm the eel spirit. It's hard to say whether this was genuine belief or just what happens when culinary ambition collides with superstition and insomnia. Naturally, the dish was controversial. One Goryeo scholar famously debated it in a poem titled, On the Ethics of Eating What Wiggles, a work still studied by bored graduate students today. He argues that brine, while honorable, should never twitch and calls for a return to respectable pickles that neither hiss nor bite. Fair enough. Still, you can't help but imagine the court dinner where this was first served. The tray lifted high, the guests pretending not to smell it, the emperor raising one eyebrow. Did he smile? Did he order it burned? Or did he perhaps lean in, take a thoughtful bite and murmur, "Surprising"? That one word, surprising, was enough to guarantee the dish's survival in culinary archives for generations. You're handed a small dish, a slice of daikon, a sliver of something soft and glistening on top. Eel pickle. You steel yourself, chew slowly. It's salty, rich, not terrible. But it does leave your lips tingling in a way that might be philosophical or deeply alarming. The cook looks at you expectantly. Too much ginger, he asks. You smile faintly. Just enough, you say. You are, after all, in no position to offend someone holding a live eel. As the night thickens and the jars are sealed once again, you step back into the alley, the scent of ginger and river mud still lingering in your hair. Somewhere behind you, a pot bubbles ominously. Somewhere ahead, safer pickles await. Probably. The sun is gone now, replaced by a wide inkwash moon that hangs above the tiled rooftops like a scoop of polished rice cake. You're in a different part of the city, quieter, older, slightly misty. A woman walks past with a basket of garlic greens, her breath visible in the cooling air. She hums softly a tune without lyrics, just rhythm and breath. You follow. She leads you unintentionally, of course, through winding alleys to a courtyard, half buried in foliage. No grand gates, no guards. Just a row of fermentation jars lined up like sleepy soldiers under moonlight. A stone marker reads, Kim Jang-so, the pickle place. But this isn't just any night. It's a full moon deep into autumn. Tonight is the scheduled turning. In early Korea, especially during the Goryeo period, the practice of aligning food preparation with lunar phases wasn't just tradition, it was doctrine. Fermentation was a conversation with the natural world, and the moon was its best interpreter. The moon told you when to slice, when to salt, when to seal. Too early and your brine might turn foul. Too late, and the vegetables lost their will to transform. You kneel beside a woman sealing her jar. Her hands are cracked from salt. She mutters a rhyme. When the moon breathes right, the cabbage won't fight. You smile. She doesn't. This belief that the moon influenced microbial activity isn't entirely far-fetched. Modern science now recognizes that temperature, humidity, and even gravitational shifts can affect fermentation rates. Did the Goryeo cooks know this on a molecular level? No. But they felt it, observed it, and honored it. Jars meant to ferment for a full cycle, about 28 days, were marked with lunar glyphs. A common one resembled a crescent cradling a spoon, symbolizing nourishment and time. Some households even kept lunar pickle calendars with notations like first frost, do not open jar, or third moon, rotate ginger pickle jars twice to avoid bitterness. Historians still argue whether these calendars were widely used or just elite affectations. But even the poorest farmer knew to pickle in harmony with the seasons, and by extension the moon. It wasn't superstition. It was insurance. Lunar pickling had rules. Leafy vegetables during waxing moons. Roots during waning. Fermentation jars were to be stirred or reburped, as one humorous scroll puts it, only when the moon was hidden by cloud to avoid sour omens. And new ferments should never be started during eclipses, which were considered deeply unlucky. One old tale tells of a family who made kimchi during a lunar eclipse and spent the next year plagued by mice, leaky roofs, and endless in-laws. The jars themselves responded, or so people believed. During the full moon, some crocks were said to hum or fizz more brightly. A few were even reported to sing. You lean close to one now, its lid lightly steaming in the cold. Is that a vibration, or just your breath catching in anticipation? One scholar, Yi Hyun-seok, wrote in 1327, "A good moon births a good brine." The moon is a grandmother to all pickles. A tender image, if slightly alarming. The moon-watching practice became ritualized. Some regions held monthly gatherings where families brought their newest jars to a central shrine, chanted blessings, and exchanged tips. These weren't just culinary check-ins, they were community glue. Your pickles reflected your patience, your timing, your trust in the world's rhythms. You pause beside a jar etched with the phrase, "Moon-turned cabbage for brave hearts." It's meant for soldiers. Fermented quickly during a waxing gibbous, using hot pepper leaf, smoked salt, and garlic chives. The jar smells like confidence, or at least something you could eat before a sword fight. Further down the row is one marked "Quiet Thoughts in Brine." You're told it was started during a cold new moon with lotus root, pear slivers, and 3 types of mushroom. It's supposedly good for long nights and quiet regrets. You're not sure whether to eat it or write a poem about it. Tonight the moon is full and generous. The jars swell slightly with pressure. A few lids rattle gently like they're dreaming. You stand still listening, feeling the tug of tide and time in your chest. Somewhere in the quietest part of your mind, a thought forms. Perhaps fermentation isn't just about preservation. Maybe it's about transformation, taking something fleeting and anchoring it in time. Letting it change, deepen, bubble into something new. And maybe, just maybe, you've been fermenting too, watching, waiting, softening around the edges. Like a jar sealed beneath moonlight. You don't wake up exactly. You just find yourself elsewhere. Still in the past, still in Korea. But now the air is heavy with the scent of garlic, pepper, and cold clay. Your fingers are tingling slightly from chopping radish too long. And around you, there's laughter, lots of it. You've arrived at the palace during Kimjang, the Royal Winter Pickling Festival. Not a feast. Not a ceremony. But something stranger, messier, and somehow more sacred, the moment when the entire household, servants, nobles, concubines, and even a few very important eunuchs come together to preserve food for the long months ahead. This isn't a day for spectators. You're quickly handed an apron and a pile of cabbage taller than your head. It's cold. Your breath clouds the air. But your hands are already red with brine, and your heart oddly feels warm. Kimjang was more than just kitchen work. It was a communal rite held in every Korean household, from peasant huts to palace kitchens. But here inside the royal court it becomes performance. There are hierarchies even in brining. The junior ladies clean the leaves. The senior matrons handle the spice mixtures. Only the most trusted cooks smear the chili paste, bold, fiery, and deeply personal between each leaf, like applying delicate lacquer. Tonight you're beside one of them, Lady Seo, famous in the court for her ferments of diplomacy. Her kimchi, it's said, once smoothed over a succession crisis. She hands you a spoonful of her secret seasoning. You taste pear shrimp paste, pine nut, and something floral. Maybe perilla, maybe poetry. She raises one eyebrow. Too sweet, you shake your head. Too perfect, you say. She almost smiles. Every jar here has a label, but not of ingredients. Instead, they're marked for who they'll feed. For the dowager queen. For the guard captain's wife. For the sickly concubine. For the monk who doesn't know he's welcome. The flavors are tailored not just to palate, but to personality, to politics, to pain. A scholar once wrote, to know a woman's mind, taste her winter kimchi. That's either romantic or terrifying. The jars are sealed in the courtyard, dozens of them. Giant clay ongi, still steaming, are packed with straw, covered with thick cloth, and secured with rope. An offering of dried anchovy and rice wine is left beside each one. Not for the gods exactly, but for the pickle itself. To wish it luck. Because as everyone here knows, a bad ferment means more than wasted food. It means shame, disappointment, hunger even. Children dance between the jars. A court musician plays something gentle on a dagum flute. The atmosphere is one of tired joy, like finishing a group project with a dozen grandmothers. You look around. The queen is laughing with a scullery maid. A high-ranking minister is scrubbing carrots beside his daughter. Hierarchy dissolves just a little in brine. Historians still argue whether this egalitarianism was real or symbolic. But multiple court records describe Kimjang as the one time per year when speech was free and cabbages like opinions overflowed. You watch Lady Seo press her hand to the side of a sealed jar. She whispers something to it. A wish, maybe. Or an apology. You ask her, do you always talk to them? She nods. Of course. A quiet jar is a faithful jar. A nervous one leaks. That night you join in the final tradition, the pickle song. Everyone from the oldest cook to the youngest apprentice sings a simple chant, half blessing, half joke, as the last jar is lowered into its straw nest. Cabbage rest red and bright. Sleep beneath the frost tonight. Spring will come, your time will wake, and all our mouths your joy shall take. It's silly. It's sweet. It's stuck in your head instantly. You step back, looking over the rows of sealed jars lined like soldiers in winter gear. Each one contains not just food, but effort, hope, an entire winter's promise. And you smell like chili salt and satisfaction. You've made something, or at least helped. And for now, that's enough. The courtyard dims behind you as the Kimjang crowd disperses, their laughter fading into the cold evening air. You wander toward the palace storage chambers, those deeper, older vaults no longer in daily use. Here the walls breathe with dampness. You run a hand along the stone, mossy in places, and find yourself facing a row of peculiar vessels, each glazed in a pale celadon green that gleams under the moonlight slipping in through narrow lattice windows. These are no ordinary jars. These are secret jars, and their designs betray a purpose far beyond storage. Their necks are slimmer, almost ceremonial. Their bodies bulbous, decorated with faint carvings, lotus petals, dragons, and odd constellations. You can't read their meaning, but you can feel it. These are the Seonggin Jangdok, the spirit jars of the Goryeo elite. Not just pickle pots, but vessels made to contain something rarer, status, memory, legacy. A few scholars believe these jars were used for more than just food. Some were intended as gifts between nobles, sealed with rare ingredients and inscriptions of personal poetry. One court letter, half love note, half recipe card, describes a pickled plum, so soft it forgets its tree, so sharp it remembers your absence. Charming, passive-aggressive, delicious. The real mystery, though, lies in the jars buried with the dead. You step closer to one jar nestled in a stone alcove flanked by faded silk and fragments of paper talismans. It's inscribed with a single-word memory. The lid is sealed with red wax and bound in gold-threaded cloth. It's said that during the height of the Goryeo dynasty, high-ranking families would ferment unique pickles for their burial rites, preserved morsels meant to accompany them into the afterlife. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual offering or simply a practical hope that the afterlife had bad catering. But many tombs from the era include such jars, some still containing fragments of preserved roots, chili seeds, and in one famously pungent case, an intact garlic bulb that had fermented itself into an oily, ghostly mush. One tomb inscription reads, "She loved lotus and laughter. Let her sleep with both." Inside, slices of lotus root pickled with cinnamon and tiny dried cherries. The tomb was sealed in 1297. The jar hadn't been opened in over 700 years. You try to imagine it. A funeral procession winding up a mountainside. A cart bearing jars as precious as gold. A priest murmuring prayers not just for the soul, but for the seal. Court documents describe fierce debates over what to include. Too sour a pickle might dishonor the spirit one lamented. Too mild and the ghost may forget it lived. There are even records of brine being spiked with ashes from incense burned at the moment of death. Symbolic, probably. Tasty, hopefully not. One particularly curious artifact, a celadon jar unearthed near Kaesong, contained a shredded silk slip soaked in vinegared rice wine and wrapped around pickled jujube slices. The theory, a romantic gesture. Or a magical one. Or maybe just a fancy snack someone wasn't ready to part with. You lift a jar gently. Its weight is modest, but it feels heavy. You don't open it, of course. You just imagine the contents, whatever's left after centuries of stillness. And more than that, you imagine the hands that filled it. The careful layering. The whispered farewell. The belief, however faint, that taste could travel beyond time. These were jars not meant to be consumed, but remembered. And in some quiet way, they still are. You bow slightly while you're not quite sure, and leave the celadon gallery behind, the scent of clay and ghost garlic, trailing faintly after you. You step back out into the palace compound, the night now fully draped across the city like an old velvet blanket. It's quiet, eerily so. But just as you're adjusting to the stillness, you catch a flicker of torchlight near the outer wall. Two figures in long coats, heads down, feet fast, and whisper quick move through the shadows. One carries something wrapped tightly in cloth. The other glances over their shoulder more often than is strictly innocent. You're not in a culinary scene anymore. You're in a spy story. And the treasure, a pickle recipe. In the tangled politics of the late Goryeo court, food could be espionage, and recipes were guarded as fiercely as battle plans. Particularly those belonging to the palace kitchen. Pickling secrets weren't written down casually. They were memorized, passed on orally, and sometimes encrypted in poetry or song. A lost brine formula could shift a family's fortunes. A stolen one, grounds for exile. One infamous tale tells of a minor noble from the southern coast who infiltrated the palace under the guise of a spice merchant. His goal? To obtain the emperor's personal pickle blend, a closely guarded mix used in royal feasts, rumored to include salted green plum, burnt rice powder, and the zest of a now extinct citrus fruit. According to a 15th century gossip chronicle, he bribed a palace eunuch with silk stockings and a cured fish, only to be caught scribbling notes under the table during a banquet. The sentence: public shaming. and a lifetime ban from fermented vegetables. Cruel but fair. Historians still argue whether such recipes were actually that valuable, or whether the court simply enjoyed the theater of culinary protectionism. After all, it wasn't just about taste. These pickles symbolized prestige, lineage, propriety. Sharing them recklessly would be like giving away your family crest or your mother's deepest gossip. To prevent leaks, many palace cooks developed decoy recipes, safe, tasty versions with one critical detail omitted. A missing root, an inverted soaking time, a switched spice. Enough to impress, never enough to copy. One document even describes a ghost recipe taught to foreign guests, made intentionally bland to insult without seeming rude. And still the espionage continued. There are records of messages passed through pickles literally. In 1389, a salt merchant was caught smuggling rolled scrolls inside hollowed daikon radishes sealed with miso paste and shipped in plain jars. The scandal was known as the Brined Letters Affair, and it led to a short-lived ban on exporting pickled goods without an imperial seal. You pause by a side door where a guard yawns and scratches at a mosquito bite. Beside him, a cart of jars waits to be inventoried. One is cracked slightly open. You peek in not to steal, just to glimpse. Inside, thin slices of gourd resting in soy brine dotted with pepper seeds and what looks like powdered licorice root. Not your usual recipe. Maybe not even legal. You wonder what secrets it holds. Not in taste, but in history. Who invented it? Who protected it? Who risked everything to smuggle it into someone else's dinner? In a world where flavor could shame a family charm, a king, or topple a rival, these jars were more than condiments. They were power disguised in salt. You turn away before anyone notices you lingering. After all, you're just a traveler here, an observer. But for a moment you were a witness to the other side of preservation, the kind that pickles more than food. The kind that ferments intrigue. It's dawn now, barely, the sky just beginning to glow like old parchment warmed over a candle. You found your way to a quiet corner of the royal grounds where the trees grow short and squat, and the grass is yellowed with cold. The air here is pungent even for someone who's just spent all night nose deep in fermented radish and political scandal. Something smells. Strong. Sharp. Almost fishy. You're not mistaken. Because you, my brave sleeper, have just arrived at the domain of the infamous delicacy that once divided a nation, fermented skate, also known as hongjohoi, or more memorably, the stinky emperor's favorite. To the uninitiated, skate is a type of cartilaginous fish, like a ray, that when fermented produces copious amounts of ammonia. Ammonia. As in the thing you clean drains with. That's the smell. That's the taste. That's what a certain Goryeo emperor couldn't get enough of. His name is lost to polite records, though scholars suspect it was King Chungnyeol, or possibly his grandson King Gongmin, depending on which chronicle you believe. All we know for sure is that one of them, during a particularly cold winter in the 14th century, became obsessed with the fermented skate dish a fisherman from Mokpo presented as a humble gift. Within a month, the emperor had declared it the official winter appetizer of the court. And within 2 months, several high-ranking ministers had begged for its removal. Reactions were strong. One courtier reportedly fainted after opening a jar. A visiting envoy from Yuan, China, thought it was a punishment dish and refused to eat anything else for 3 days. Another noted it smelled like a latrine had married a thundercloud. Poetic. Yet the emperor insisted on serving it. At banquets. In closed halls. With the windows barred against the cold. Palace folklore says the royal physician took to wearing sprigs of mugwort under his nose just to make it through mealtimes. Kitchen staff lit incense constantly, which only seemed to mingle unpleasantly with the skate's signature aroma. And the jars, they had to be stored in sealed boxes buried halfway in the ground, and still guards complained of dreams that tasted of ammonia and regret. Historians still argue whether the emperor truly loved the dish, or whether he enjoyed the discomfort it caused. Either theory fits. Despite or because of its odor, fermented skate developed a kind of mythos. It was said to clear the mind, awaken the third breath, and drive off weak-hearted lovers. Whether that referred to its pungency or its lingering aftertaste is unclear. You're offered a piece now, thin-sliced and glossy, served with a tiny bowl of pickled garlic stems and coarse salt. The attending chef watches you solemnly. You lean forward cautiously, and the scent hits your sinuses like a spiritual slap. Your eyes water. Your knees betray you. But you eat it. And, well, it's not bad. It's assertive, complex, a little like licking a lightning bolt. But once the burn fades, you get it. That strange sweetness underneath the stink. The way the texture resists then yields. The echo of the ocean buried beneath all that chaos. You nod. The chef looks pleased. Somewhere a ghost emperor cackles in vindication. Eventually, the skate ban was reinstated by a later ruler, probably tired of the smell and the petitions. But among commoners and coastal towns, the dish survived, thrived even. You can still find it today, served with cabbage wraps and chilled soju in restaurants that warn customers in advance not to breathe too deeply. But back in your story, in this soft-lit palace morning, the legacy is clear. Pickles, even the fishy kind, could be more than food. They could be defiance, or nostalgia, or obsession wrapped in vinegar and left to ripen in the dark. You leave the dish unfinished, not out of offense, but out of reverence. Some things you decide are best tasted once, remembered forever, and left in the jar for someone braver. You step away from the scent of skate like a sailor leaving a storm. The air clears slowly as you pass through a row of apricot trees and into a quiet annex of the palace grounds, a long, low building with sliding screens and tall windows that filter in soft morning light. You're in the herbal wing, once part of the royal apothecary. Here jars line the walls, not in rows of appetite, but in rows of treatment. Pickles, it turns out, weren't just food or flavor in Imperial Korea. They were medicine. One scroll nearly transparent with age lists more than 120 fermented remedies. Some are familiar: garlic and vinegar for colds, ginger root for digestion. Others are less expected. Pickled plum with pine ash for lingering gloom. Radish soaked in bear bile for cowardice. Let's just not try that one ever. The lines between kitchen and clinic were blurred. The royal physician, or Yuigwe, didn't just mix tonics. He oversaw seasonal diets, selected mood-balancing brines, and advised on what kinds of fermented roots to serve at specific political events. A banquet for mourning, gentle vinegars. No pepper. A summit with foreign envoys, aggressive garlic to show unbending domestic character. Subtle. Not quite. Effective, absolutely. A preserved document from Queen Mundiok's court records a time when a jar of pickled mugwort stems was administered to calm her nervous fires after a dream involving cranes and broken shoes. Whether it worked is unclear, but her servants noted that she took tea peacefully that afternoon and wrote 3 verses about clouds. Not bad for fermented weeds. Historians still argue whether these remedies had biochemical merit or were mostly placebo. But modern scientists have found that lactic acid bacteria in kimchi and other fermented foods do influence gut health, immune function, and even mood regulation. So maybe those ancient physicians were onto something after all, working with the microbes long before anyone could name them. One of the more curious entries is for tongue-taming turnip, meant to soothe sharp tempers. It includes sliced white turnip, fermented in mulberry vinegar, dried chrysanthemum petals, and a single clove of black garlic. Served in secret to bickering ministers. A subtle peace offering, or a threat depending on who poured the brine. You find yourself in front of a small altar in the corner of the room. On it, a single jade bowl holds a few slivers of pickled lotus root and 1 wrinkled jujube. A plaque reads, "For memory, for clarity, for the days that forget themselves." A nun enters quietly, barefoot, eyes downcast. She lights a small stick of incense and bows to the altar, then to you. Without speaking, she hands you a scroll. Inside a simple recipe. Pickle for restful thought. 2 slices lotus root. 1 dried date. A pinch of crushed fennel. Vinegar from the 2nd month. Stir once. Then forget. You smile. It's both a prescription and a poem. You're told that couriers once carried small jars of medicinal pickles with them on long journeys. They were called brine blessings. Some designed to stave off illness, others simply to comfort the lonely. One letter from a soldier on the northern frontier describes receiving such a jar from his mother. It smelled of home and old shoes. But I cried anyway. You imagine them now, those travelers, those ministers, those queens sipping fermented roots, not for pleasure, but for balance, for quiet, for healing. You take a piece of that lotus root from the altar, place it gently on your tongue, and close your eyes. It tastes faintly of vinegar and something floral, yes, but also of stillness, of long mornings and longer thoughts. And for just a moment you feel like you've swallowed the hush of the whole room. The hallway outside the herbal wing is quiet dust, dancing in beams of morning light. You pass a row of screens painted with waves and cranes, and step into a tucked-away library, narrow, dry, and utterly still. The shelves are stacked not with poetry or state records, but with cookbooks. And there in the center of the room, placed on a stone pedestal as though it were a sacred text, rests one of the most peculiar culinary relics in Korean history, the eunuch's pickle book. Its cover is cracked leather stained with brine in one corner and tied shut with a strip of faded silk. You kneel, you untie the ribbon, and you open it slowly. Inside, line after line of handwritten entries, some neat, some scrawled in desperate hurry. There are illustrations, 2 simple sketches of turnips, garlic bulbs, ceramic lids, bundles of herbs tied with string. Marginal notes like too much radish or no fish sauce for the queen's cousin again. This isn't just a book. It's a life. The author was eunuch Ban Seong-jun, a palace official who lived during the mid-1300s and reportedly catalogued every pickle made during his decades in the royal kitchen. 173 entries. Each recipe titled with equal reverence, whether meant for emperors or scullery maids. Historians consider the book a miracle of domestic record-keeping. Scholars still argue whether he compiled it alone or edited older scrolls. But his voice is clear throughout, dry, particular, and unexpectedly funny. One entry begins, "If you must pickle eggplant and the sky is sulking, don't bother. It will betray you." Another warns, "Too many chilies in the Queen Dowager's jar, and she'll believe you're plotting something." You flip through pages and find entire sections devoted to emotional pairings. Soothing pickle for exhausted servants made from lightly fermented cucumber and pear. Rebuking pickle for bragging ministers, which includes bitter greens and a splash of spoiled soy, a prank perhaps, or a diplomatic statement. Then there's victory pickle, created for a military feast after a successful border defense. It combines fiery red pepper, salted skate liver, hold your nose, and a garnish of gold leaf. The note beneath simply reads, "Only for winners. Absolutely never served to anyone moody." Ban's dedication was legendary. According to royal gossip, he once halted an entire state procession because a jar of pickled burdock hadn't bloomed properly. He demanded another week of fermentation. The prince fainted from hunger. Ban received a commendation for culinary integrity. One scholar describes him as half chef, half monk, and half menace to the kitchen staff. That math doesn't quite check out, but emotionally it tracks. You find one final entry near the back of the book, written in fading ink, "Pickle for when all else fails." 1 wilted radish. The last of the spring vinegar. A sigh. Close the jar. Leave in the sun. Do not expect miracles, but don't rule them out either. You sit in silence, the book heavy in your lap, the scent of old paper and phantom vinegar filling the air. Ban's book wasn't just about ingredients. It was about moments, politics, weather, mood. He recorded a kingdom through Pickles, each entry a miniature portrait of a life unseen. Not the generals or kings, but the tired hands that salted cabbage, the nervous apprentices who mislabeled jars, the concubines who requested sweeter brine when they were lonely. You close the book gently, bow your head in thanks, and leave it resting on the pedestal just as you found it. After all, the jar may be sealed, but the flavor still lingers. Your feet are sore now, pleasantly so. You've walked through kitchens, libraries, gardens, and cellars. But nothing prepares you for the chaos you find as you turn down a narrow corridor toward the docks. The palace port, normally a place of dignified bustle, shipments of rice rolls of silk, the occasional camel gift from the Mongols, is in full upheaval. At the center of the commotion, a barrel full of pickles, and a captain screaming. You've wandered straight into one of the strangest minor incidents in Goryeo naval history, the Pickle War at sea. Now, the word war might be generous. It was technically a skirmish. But tell that to the scribes who recorded the affair in dramatic detail, complete with accusations, oaths, and a particularly insulting poem involving sour cabbage and someone's mother. Here's what happened. In the late 1300s, a shipment of royal pickles, crafted over several months and meant as a diplomatic gift to a southern ally, was mistakenly loaded onto the wrong vessel. That vessel belonged to a rival noble family, one that had recently been snubbed in a marriage negotiation, and was not feeling particularly loyal. The pickles were exquisite. Seaweed and wild garlic fermented in rare spring vinegar, balanced with just a hint of smoked plum. They were packed in glazed jars cushioned with silk and marked with the Imperial seal. Their destination was a distant governor's table. But when the jars turned up in a foreign harbor under the wrong flag, all fermented hell broke loose. Historians still argue whether the misplacement was accidental or the result of deliberate sabotage. Some blame a kitchen eunuch named Cheolman, who allegedly fell asleep during inventory and awoke to a completely different ship. Others suspect foul play by a jealous underchef, known only in the records as the one with the green mole. Whatever the cause, the diplomatic insult was real. The intended recipients were furious. The emperor was humiliated. And the rival noble. He reportedly served the pickles at his daughter's wedding with a smug grin and a toast that began, "From my table to yours, flavored with forgotten loyalties." You wince. That's the kind of passive aggression you can taste. The emperor responded not with weapons, but with bureaucracy. A formal inquisition was launched. Every cook, sailor, and clerk was interrogated. Several were reassigned to extremely inland duties, managing cabbage fields far from any port. And then came the poetry. Yes, the poetry. One satirical scribe penned a ballad titled "Brined Betrayal," in which he describes the pickle jars weeping softly as they crossed the wrong sea. Another poem anonymously authored ends with the line, "The spice was fine, but so was treason." But despite the chaos, the actual pickles were widely praised. Even the insulted governor, once he cooled down, reportedly asked for the recipe. He was denied. Firmly. You step around the still frantic dockworkers and spot a half-open barrel leaking fragrant brine. Inside lotus root, a few sad anchovies, and the tattered corner of what might have been a shipping manifest. You smile. Even a diplomatic disaster can smell delicious given enough ginger. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Pickle War wasn't the scandal or the satire, but the new labeling system it inspired. From that year forward, royal pickle shipments included not just name and seal, but intended recipient, poetic dedication, and emotional tone. One surviving tag reads, "To General Hio for bravery. May your tongue dance with sourness, but your heart remain calm." Elegant, direct, slightly spicy. You step back as a steward carefully reseals the barrel and mutters a prayer to avoid future misdeliveries. The dock quiets again. The sea sloshes against wood, and the air tinged with vinegar salt, and scandal feels surprisingly fresh. You think perhaps every good jar of pickles is a tiny risk. Of flavor, of politics, of memory. You're walking now through the shadowy outer gardens of the palace where the grass grows long and the stone paths are worn with centuries of soft, tired footsteps. The sun is up, but weak filtered through fog and bamboo. Here, far from the kitchens and courts, lies a lesser-known corner of palace life, the pantry of the forgotten. It's not marked on any official map, but you find it easily. A low storage building, its wooden door crooked on its hinges, its walls bowed inward with age. No guards, no lights. Just a rustle of wind and the soft buzz of flies that don't seem to know they're out of place. You step inside. It's cool, dry, and very still. Dust hangs in the air. Broken jars line the walls, some half-sealed, others shattered. And somewhere beneath the silence, there's a smell not fresh, not rotten, but strange. Old brine, maybe. Maybe something else. This is where you first hear the stories. Whispers passed among servants, passed again among scholars, tales of haunted pickle jars. Now look, you're not usually one to believe in ghost stories, especially the culinary kind. But in ancient Korea, especially within the palace walls, the line between food and folklore was blurrier than a ferment gone wrong. Certain jars, those that spoiled unexpectedly, those that leaked in the night, those that hissed when no one touched them, were said to be unquiet. Some claimed they were cursed by disgruntled chefs. Others believed spirits had taken residence in forgotten crocks, especially those abandoned mid-ferment, during times of grief, war, or betrayal. One legend tells of a jar sealed during the reign of Queen Junghwa, containing pickled turnip and wild yam. The servant tasked with watching it died in his sleep. 2 days later, his expression described as sour. No one would touch the jar afterward. It was moved to the storage hut where it sat for 50 years. It rattled occasionally. Another tale speaks of a jar that was opened after decades and found to contain, no joke, perfectly preserved blossoms, not food at all. As if the jar had changed its contents on its own. The head cook cried. The apprentice fainted. The jar was quietly buried behind the chicken coop. Historians still argue whether these stories are allegorical warnings about waste or genuine supernatural beliefs. Some anthropologists lean toward metaphor. Others point out that fermented jars can, under the right conditions, expand, contract, whistle, or even explode with enough pressure. The ghosts perhaps were just gas. Still, the tales persist. You run your fingers along the rim of one jar, its glaze chipped and scabbed with salt residue. There's an inscription scratched faintly along the lid. She waits. You step back quickly. Goosebumps. Maybe just the draft. A rare scroll from a minor monk named Jihuan tells of a ritual designed to calm unsettled brine. It involves bowing to the jar, burning garlic skins, and reciting a soft chant that translates roughly to ferment in peace. Let flavor, not fury, rise. Charming. Oddly comforting. Other jars in this forgotten room are labeled not with recipes, but with emotions, regret, grudge. Second thoughts. One particularly large crock is marked unfinished. It's hard to say whether they were left here because they failed or because no one dared to test them. You breathe in deeply. Beneath the dust you catch the faintest notes of something floral. Maybe perilla. Maybe thyme. Whatever haunts this place, it doesn't feel angry. Just old. Like a memory you didn't expect to find but aren't quite ready to let go of. You leave quietly, the door creaking behind you. The garden feels brighter now. The ghosts, if they were ever there, have gone back to sleep in their jars. You step out of the ghost-scented pantry and into brisk air that tastes of wood smoke and early frost. The palace looms behind you, but your path veers away now toward the rice fields and muddy commons where history rarely bothers to look. The land flattens. The walls fade. The smells shift from incense and vinegar to soil and firewood, and soon enough you arrive in the middle of a village on the edge of rebellion. It's the late 17th century. The dynasty is worn at the elbows. Taxes have risen, crops have failed, and in the face of hunger, the people have taken up their simplest, oldest weapon, pickle jars. You duck into a peasant hut, low-ceilinged, smoky warm with body heat and stubbornness. Inside, a family sits around a cracked earthen pot. They're not eating kimchi. There's no cabbage, no chili. This is rebel pickle-foraged weeds, radish peels, fern stems, and a splash of sour millet liquor. It smells challenging, but they pass it around like treasure. This was common during uprisings. When food was scarce and protest dangerous, farmers fermented what they had, not just to eat but to remember, to survive. Pickling became both preservation and protest. One old diary from the Giola region records the making of a dark jar filled with wild herbs picked under cover of night and fermented in brine made from stolen sea salt. We ate it on the day the governor fled, the writer notes. It tasted of everything we weren't supposed to touch. There are no recipes here. Just necessity. Dandelion leaves, pine shoots, even bark soaked and boiled and brined until it softened. Some pickles were bitter, some poisonous if made wrong. Many weren't meant to taste good, they were meant to last. Historians still argue whether these jars were purely practical, or whether they became symbols, statements even. After all, fermenting weeds in secret when cabbage was taxed and rice hoarded felt like a quiet act of defiance, like saying you cannot pickle our hunger out of us. There's one folktale from this era about a young widow who fed an entire village through winter, using only what she could ferment. She pickled time itself, the people said. And in spring they painted her door with red chili to ward off famine's return. You kneel beside one of the jars. It's sealed with a flat rock and a twist of hemp string. The brine inside is dark green and thick with unknown things. You take a bite. It's sharp, medicinal, absolutely illegal by palace standards, and utterly alive. You look around at the faces here, tired, wary, still proud. They don't say much. They just eat. And in that bite, in that jar, there's something unshakable. Not flavor, not tradition, just endurance. Brined, bottled, waiting. And you realize not all royal recipes came from the top down. Some bubbled up from below, born in dirt and desperation. Shaped by wind, seasoned by struggle. The taste lingers long after you leave the hut. A little bitter, a little brave. The sky above you is slate gray now, the kind of color that smells like snow before it falls. You walk along a narrow dirt path, winding past burial mounds, small hills rising from the frozen earth, like sleeping animals under blankets of dry grass. These are the royal tombs. And nestled among them, hidden behind a cluster of pine trees, is a stone shed. Inside, lit only by what daylight seeps through its slatted door, is a single jar. It sits on a platform of woven straw surrounded by carefully folded cloth and a bowl of incense ash, long gone cold. This, you realize, is not just a jar. It is a burial pickle. Yes, really. In certain periods of the Goryeo and early Joseon dynasties, it was common practice among nobility to include jars of pickled food in burial chambers. Not for emergency snacks, though, let's be honest. Who wouldn't want a little fermented turnip in the afterlife? But as offerings to accompany the spirit on its long journey. Some jars were sealed tightly and intended never to be opened again. Others were buried half full to invite completion after death, according to one rather poetic funerary manual. In either case, they were packed with meaning. You kneel before this jar. The glaze is aged and cracked, the lid bound with faded silk. Carved into its side are 4 characters, bitter for the journey. And beneath that smaller, almost hidden sweet on return. You wonder what's inside. Pickled quince, perhaps. Aged radish soaked in honeyed brine. One scholar posited that the wealthy occasionally commissioned farewell ferments, custom jars made to reflect the personality or regrets of the deceased. A general might be buried with fiery pickled garlic, a scholar with preserved lotus stems in rice vinegar, a widow with sweet sour plum slices. One royal tomb unearthed near Gwangju contained not only traditional burial items, robes, ornaments, scrolls, but also 3 jars of kimchi, perfectly sealed. When opened, the brine was black, thick as ink, and smelled of sadness. Scientists called it a fermentation miracle. The monks who supervised the tomb's reopening refused to eat it, citing lingering attachments. Historians still argue whether this practice was symbolic or practical. Did the dead really need pickles? Was it a holdover from earlier shamanic beliefs or simply a gesture of care? Maybe it was both. After all, food speaks when words fall short, and in death, it becomes language. You run your fingers across the jar's rim, cold, solid, silent. There's a belief in some old texts that a pickle left untouched for 100 years gains wisdom, that its sourness deepens into something philosophical, that if you taste it just once, you might remember things that never happened, dreams someone else had, sorrows long buried. You don't open the jar. You couldn't even if you wanted to. It's sealed with more than wax. It's sealed with intent. But you leave something beside it, a sprig of wild ginger you picked earlier. Just a small offering. Something fragrant. Something warm. And as you turn away from the burial grounds, the wind lifts a little. A small gust. Enough to rattle the grass. Enough to make the lid on the jar shift ever so slightly. You don't look back. You don't need to. The dead have their pickles. And the living too must carry flavor forward. You're back in the palace. Sort of. Not the lofty ceremonial halls of gold and embroidery, but the inner kitchens, the kind only a few ever see, and fewer still survive with their reputations intact. It's early afternoon now. Fires are roaring. Steam clings to the rafters. And in the center of it all, flanked by trembling assistants and sweating chefs, stands the emperor. And you. Welcome to the most nerve-wracking culinary ordeal of the imperial household, the emperor's taste test. Now this isn't some light nibble on a silver spoon while a scribe takes notes. No. This is a grand high-stakes presentation. 9 pickled offerings on 9 different lacquered trays, each arranged according to a strict code of balance, color, texture, heat, saltiness, sourness, and most daunting of all, emotional resonance. You step into the kitchen just as the final preparations are underway. A junior chef is sobbing softly into a handful of pickled kelp. Another is muttering a last-minute prayer to the spirit of salted plum. One tray is whisked away and replaced because a single shiso leaf is crooked. A crooked leaf. This is serious. You learn that this particular emperor, let's call him King Gyeongjong, though historians still argue if it was him or his cousin, is notorious for having both a refined palate and an unpredictable mood. One day he's praising a daikon slice for singing with restraint. The next, he's flinging a pickle across the room because it tastes like disappointment. And today he seems unreadable. The trays are arranged before him in a half circle. You watch, breath held, as he raises his chopsticks. First, a pickled burdock root soaked in honeyed soy. He chews slowly. No reaction. Second, a spicy cucumber with crushed sesame and a touch of mint. He pauses. Blinks. Nods once. Hope blooms. Third, a lotus stem in sour plum brine. He frowns. No words. Someone quietly leaves the room and is never seen again. And then, the fourth tray. This is the wild card. A resurrected recipe from the 12th century. Pickled myoga ginger with fermented peach peel and a hint of burnt rice powder. The chef says it tastes like a memory you weren't sure was yours. Bold move. The emperor raises a single eyebrow. He eats. He closes his eyes. The room stops breathing. Then softly he says, That's it. Not a scolding. Not an ode. Just a hum. The chef buckles slightly at the knees, overwhelmed with relief. A servant scribbles down approved in the royal food log, underlined twice. Somewhere in the corner, someone silently weeps into a tea cloth. Historians debate the significance of these taste tests. Some insist they were purely ceremonial. Others argue they shaped policy. One particularly spicy rumor claims a general's entire promotion hinged on the emperor's fondness for his sister-in-law's brined radish. Petty possibly. Effective definitely. There's a side tradition to all of this: the silent plate. The emperor is always presented with one mystery pickle whose origins are withheld. If he likes it, the creator is summoned and honored. If he doesn't, the identity remains secret, sparing reputations. Today's silent plate is a soft cabbage roll stuffed with fermented pear and slivers of aged daikon. It's subtle, quiet, humble. He eats it. He places his chopsticks down. He doesn't speak. You think that means doom, until he lifts the tray, nods slightly and places it to his left, the side of favor. No one cheers. No one dares. But the chef, an older woman with soot on her face and a scar above one eye, smiles, gently folds her hands and bows. You lean close to her later. Yours. She nods. It's what my grandmother made when the roof leaked and we had nothing else. You nod back. That tracks. Sometimes the best pickle isn't the fanciest. It's the one that carries weather in its taste, that echoes a roof, a grandmother, a year you barely survived. You leave the tasting room shaken, salty, and very, very hungry. The palace corridors fade behind you as you slip into a quieter world, a space filled not with silk or spice, but with whispered secrets and stolen glances. You find yourself in the servants' quarters where the lights are low and the air carries the faint scent of smoke and salt. Here, amid the clatter of bowls and the soft rustle of hanbok skirts, an unlikely romance unfolds, not in words, but in pickle metaphors. You hold in your hands a folded note passed covertly between two kitchens. It's written in delicate calligraphy, but instead of declarations or sonnets, it's filled with recipes and brine instructions. The message? A love letter. Lines like, "Your hands are like the crisp radish, sharp but comforting, and may our hearts ferment together like ripe cabbage in autumn." The couple, two palace servants, a kitchen maid, and a scroll copier who risked much in a place where even a glance could invite suspicion. This was not uncommon. The language of pickles offered a secret code, a way to express affection, longing, and sometimes frustration without risking the wrath of masters or maids. One letter enclosed a small sachet of crushed perilla seeds, a symbol of fidelity and endurance. Another promised a jar of sweet garlic scapes reserved for moonlit meetings by the lotus pond. Historians still argue whether these letters were genuine or a literary device. But several surviving correspondences in palace archives suggest the tradition was alive and well. You can almost hear the quiet clink of jars being opened in hidden corners, the hushed laughter of lovers sharing a bite. The irony is delicious. In a society of strict rules and rigid hierarchies, pickles became a secret language of freedom, rebellion, and connection. As you fold the note back up, you wonder, what flavors would you choose to say "I love you"? Something fiery, something sweet, or perhaps a bitter brine with a hint of hope. Love, like pickles, is a slow process. It takes patience. It takes care. And sometimes it surprises you with a flavor you never expected. You tuck the note away and step back into the corridor, the scent of fermented garlic lingering in your thoughts. A reminder that even in silence, stories find a way to be told. The palace's lively bustle fades behind you as you enter the soft-lit quarters where the kisang, the elite female entertainers, live and work. Their world is one of art, poetry, and subtle power. And their favorite snack, you guessed it, pickles. But not just any pickles. Kizang preferred snacks that were as complex and mysterious as their own lives, spicy, fragrant, and sometimes dangerously sharp. You watch as a Kizang delicately unwraps a bundle of pickled perilla leaves, their glossy green edges curling like silk ribbons. She offers one to a companion who takes it with a coy smile and a quick glance that says, "More, please." These pickles were not just food. They were companions during late-night conversations, inspiration for verses, and a way to signal mood and favor. Some were thought to enhance beauty. Others were said to stimulate creativity or calm nerves before a performance. One particularly prized pickle was the midnight lotus, made from lotus roots soaked in plum vinegar and dusted with crushed red pepper, a combination that both soothed and stoked the senses. It's said that poets wrote their best lines after a few bites. Kizang kitchens guarded their recipes closely, passing them down from mistress to apprentice, like precious heirlooms. There are records of secret pickle tastings where new creations were judged by a panel of seasoned performers. The winner might earn a coveted place in the court, or a gift from a noble patron. Historians still debate how much influence Kizang pickles had on broader culinary trends. Some argue they introduced bold spices and new fermentation methods to the upper classes, while others see them as guardians of regional folk traditions. You sit quietly at the edge of the room, savoring a sliver of pickled radish marinated with honey and sesame. The sweetness balances the sharpness, a dance of flavors reflecting the Kizang themselves, tender, yet fierce. Outside, the moon rises high, silver and patient. Inside, laughter and music flow like warm wine. And somewhere between the bite and the song, you realize that pickles were not just preserved food. They were preserved moments kept alive in taste and memory. You tuck the last piece into your mouth and let the night carry you forward. You barely have time to savor the Kizang's world before an ominous crack shakes the air. You jump startled as a nearby kitchen door bursts open and a young apprentice stumbles out, clutching her bleeding hand and muttering about a jar gone rogue. You follow quickly inside to witness the aftermath of one of the most dreaded disasters in the royal kitchen: fermentation gone wrong. Pickling is an art, yes, but it's also a science prone to explosions, leaks, and downright nasty surprises. The culprit today: a massive crock of cabbage kimchi that had been sealed for too long, too tightly, and in too warm a corner. The lid has popped off with a bang that echoed through the halls, sending fermented brine and cabbage flying like confetti. The apprentice's injury isn't severe, but the shock lingers. You watch as the head chef surveys the scene with a mix of frustration and weary acceptance. "It happens," she says. "Fermentation is alive. Sometimes it fights back." Stories of exploding pickle jars are common in palace records. One scroll describes a midsummer mishap where a jar sealed during a heat wave erupted so violently it broke several floor tiles and flooded a corridor with sour, salty water. The stench lingered for days, earning the nickname the Great Brine Flood. Another tale tells of an apprentice so terrified by the popping jars that she refused to enter the storage room for a month, subsisting only on dried rice cakes and herbal tea. Historians debate whether these incidents were accidents or cautionary tales designed to keep novices humble. But one thing is clear: the unpredictability of fermentation was both a challenge and a thrill. You're handed a piece of kimchi salvaged from the wreckage. It's softer than usual with a sharp tang and a hint of burnt sugar. "Lucky batch," the chef jokes. The rest is history. You laugh though your nose wrinkles. The kitchen is already busy cleaning up lids being resealed, jars checked twice. You think about all the jars that didn't make it. The lost flavors, the broken promises, the invisible explosions. And you realize sometimes history isn't about perfect preservation. It's about the mess, the accidents, the bold attempts, and yes, the occasional kaboom. You step outside into the cool air, your mouth tingling, your mind Buzzing with the lively, unpredictable life of fermented food, you shake off the kitchen chaos and step outside into a harsher world, one shaped by drought scarcity and the fragile balance of earth and sky. The year is 1430, and the climate has turned against the kingdom. Fields that once flourished are cracked and barren. Ceramics essential for pickle storage are in short supply due to a trade embargo and broken kilns. The heart of Korea's fermentation tradition teeters on the edge of collapse. You find yourself in a bustling marketplace where vendors haggle over precious jars, clay pots with chips in their rims, jars with lids patched by rattan bindings. Every piece is a treasure, for without them, there are no pickles, no preservation, no winter survival. Farmers speak in worried tones about the cabbage crisis. Without enough clay vessels, they must resort to wooden boxes or even animal hides to store their ferments. Both are riskier and change the flavor. Some old-timers swear they can taste the difference in the kimchi served this year, more sour, less vibrant. Historical records confirm that this crisis sparked emergency measures. The court commissioned new kilns, imported ceramics secretly, and even experimented with metal-lined containers. The royal archives include petitions begging local potters to prioritize pickle jars over decorative wares, a serious request in a culture that prized both. Climate scholars still debate the impact of this drought on fermentation culture. Did it contribute to a temporary loss of traditional recipes? Did it encourage innovation or stagnation? The evidence is fragmentary, but suggestive. One particularly dramatic report describes a village elder who, faced with a failing crop, fermented wild radish leaves in seaweed brine, producing a tangy pickle that saved his community. His recipe was recorded in an oral tradition that survived the crisis, becoming a symbol of resilience. You imagine the pressures on the cooks forced to adapt, the anxiety in their hands as they packed precious cabbage into imperfect vessels, the hope that their brine would hold through a brutal winter. The crisis also inspired creativity. New pickling techniques emerged, some adding fermented rice wine to slow spoilage, others using layers of crushed oyster shells to regulate moisture. A few experimental jars from this period contain unusual additives like pine resin or ground red clay. Walking through the marketplace, you see jars stacked haphazardly beside fresh produce, their faded seals a testament to a kingdom struggling to preserve more than just food. You pause, breathe deeply. The air is heavy with uncertainty, salt, and the stubborn tang of survival. And somewhere in the midst of hardship, you realize fermentation is not just about preserving vegetables. It's about preserving hope. You wander back into the palace, but tonight its halls are filled with unfamiliar voices and extravagant colors. The court is hosting foreign emissaries, envoys from China, diplomats from Japan, merchants from the far-off islands and steppes. The air shimmers with incense brocade, and the anxious rustle of interpreters translating every word, every bite. At the center of the banquet is a massive lacquered table groaning with food. Bowls of steaming rice, platters of dried fish, and of course dazzling arrays of pickled delicacies. This is a chance for the royal kitchen to show off the very best of Korea's preserved cuisine. You take a seat among the visiting dignitaries. The first plate arrives, pale cucumber slices in sweetened brine, followed by turnip sticks dusted with perilla seed, and finally the fiery star, deep red kimchi glistening with gochugaru. One Japanese envoy picks up a sliver of lotus root, inspects it, and nibbles. His face remains unreadable. A Mongolian merchant pops a piece of radish into his mouth, chews, and suddenly bursts out laughing, thumping the table with delight. The Chinese ambassador, more cautious, examines a pickled garlic clove, takes the smallest possible bite, and discreetly chases it with an entire cup of tea. A court scribe scribbles furiously to capture every reaction, positive or otherwise. Historians still argue about the actual influence of Korean pickles on foreign guests. Did they spark new culinary trends abroad or simply serve as curious novelties? Some records suggest foreign diplomats requested jars to take home, only to let them spoil on the journey. Others recount how certain Japanese traders developed a taste for spicy pickled cabbage and later introduced it to their own kitchens, albeit with their own tweaks. One famous tale describes an Italian missionary who, upon tasting a particularly pungent batch of kimchi, declared it a miracle and a menace in equal measure, and promptly wrote to Rome for a shipment of cheese to dull the burn. The cheese arrived moldy, but the story lived on. Your own experience is a medley of flavors and reactions. Some pickles sing with balance. Others land like a slap on the tongue. A few dishes seem designed to test courage, like a platter of fermented baby garlic bulbs so strong they could clear a stuffy nose from across the room. You realize how much food can bridge or widen cultural divides. One bold Japanese emissary asks for the recipe to a tart cucumber pickle, only to receive a poem in response. To taste it, reads, is to travel. The diplomat bows deeply, perhaps understanding, perhaps not. As the evening continues, laughter rises above any awkwardness. Glasses clink. Tastes are compared. Even the skeptical ambassador dares a second bite. And in that noisy, fragrant room, you see that pickles, simple, ancient, and ever surprising, are more than food. They're a passport, a risk, an invitation to connect. You savor a last piece of kimchi, feel your cheeks flush from the spice, and smile. You've tasted the world, and in return, let the world taste you. The palace quiets as the foreign guests depart, their laughter and bewildered compliments echoing in the chilly night. You walk the now empty corridors, led by the soft glow of paper lanterns and the persistent tug of curiosity. Down a little-used hallway past the faded tapestries and dusty ledgers, you discover a small gathering of royal scholars hunched, squinting, debating furiously over scraps of parchment and the faintest whiff of something sharp. They're after a legend, the holy grail of the royal kitchen, the recipe for a lost imperial pickle. Every culinary tradition has its unicorn, and in Korea, it's the silver lotus pickle, a delicacy that, according to court gossip, once dazzled a queen and then disappeared for centuries. Some said it was too laborious to recreate. Others whispered it went out of favor after a diplomatic scandal involving an overeager Japanese envoy and a bowl dropped in his lap. Whatever the truth, all that remains are hints. A scribbled note here, a torn diary page there, the memory of a scent caught in an old kitchen mat. Tonight you get a front row seat to culinary archaeology. The scholars are part historian, part chef, and part detective. They pore over lists of ingredients: lotus root, young ginger pear vinegar, dried chrysanthemum petals, and curiously, a pinch of ground abalone shell. One scholar insists the brine should be sweetened with honey from the palace gardens. Another believes it must be aged for exactly 21 days, turned twice daily under a waxing moon. A third, less romantic, shrugs and says, it probably just tasted like fancy pickled salad. Historians still argue whether the silver lotus pickle ever really existed, or if it was simply a myth created to impress foreign visitors and outwit court rivals. Some say its extinction was a political maneuver, a way to punish the chef who guarded its secrets too closely. The scholars decide to try anyway. With trembling hands they gather ingredients, substituting what they must, guessing at what they can't. Slices of lotus root are blanched and cooled. Ginger is cut into impossibly thin ribbons, and a brine of honeyed vinegar is poured over everything, scented with petals, and just a trace of sea mineral. You join them in the kitchen, peering over shoulders, savoring the suspense. The room fills with hope, skepticism, and the gentle bubbling of a fresh ferment. A hush falls as the lid is sealed, marked with a scrap of parchment that reads, "For memory, for taste, for what might have been." They set the jar aside and look at each other. Success, failure. No one knows, not yet. But as you inhale the floral, tangy aroma, you realize that some recipes matter not for their taste, but for the pursuit, the trying, the remembering. The possibility that if only for a moment you could taste what history left behind. You linger a little longer, letting the scent of silver lotus pickle fill the kitchen. Whether it's real or just a legend, it reminds you that the most delicious things often vanish, only to be found again in stories and dreams, or in the patient work of those unwilling to let flavor fade. The night is deep, and the palace is finally silent. You find yourself alone in a small empty courtyard, bathed in silver moonlight. A gentle breeze stirs the trees overhead, carrying the mingled scents of earth-old stone and the faintest whisper of vinegar and garlic. This is your last stop, your last taste on the journey through Korea's Imperial pickle history. Before you, resting on a simple stone bench, sits a single jar. It isn't ornate or famous. Its glaze is cracked and flecked. The lid is a flat stone, smooth from years of touch. There's no label, no guard. It could be from any era, Goryeo Joseon or something in between. You sit, you breathe, you open the jar. Inside is a pickle like none you've seen before. Pale lotus root, ginger, wild greens, and a scattering of pear slices, all floating in a light, almost clear brine. It smells clean, bright, and earthy. You lift out a piece of lotus root, letting the cool brine drip from your fingers. One bite. The crunch is gentle, the flavor delicate, a little sweet, a little sour, a trace of something floral. Somehow it feels both ancient and completely new. For a moment you close your eyes and let the taste take you back, not just through the pages of history, but through the lives of all those who fermented, waited, and hoped. The monks in their mountain kitchens, the palace cooks on festival nights, the rebels in their smoky huts, the kisaeng and their midnight poems, the lovers trading brined secrets. Each story, each jar, a thread in the tapestry of a nation's memory. Historians still argue whether royal pickles changed the world or simply preserved it, whether the greatest recipes are lost forever or waiting to be reborn by patient hands. Tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, what matters is this single perfect bite, a bridge between centuries, a quiet celebration of survival, art, and flavor. You set the jar down and listen. There's nothing but the breeze, the distant call of a night bird, and your own breath slowing with each heartbeat. In the end, every jar is a little empire, sealed, forgotten, rediscovered. You've tasted what the emperors tasted, dreamed what the chefs dreamed, and maybe, just maybe, understood how a humble pickle could carry hope through even the longest, coldest nights. Now let's ease gently towards sleep together. The palace fades, the pickles settle, your mind drifts softer and softer. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow, as if you too are settling into brine, surrounded by quiet comfort and the slow work of time. Imagine that cool stone courtyard, the moon shining gentle over ancient jars, the faintest sounds of wind in bamboo, and the distant hush of the palace as it dreams. Each jar, sealed with care, contains not just vegetables and salt, but memory moments of patience, resilience, and love. Let those feelings settle over you now, like a warm blanket or a familiar song that's played quietly in the background of your life. You are safe here in this story and in your bed. The worries of the day, the small mistakes, the what-ifs and might-have-beens, let them all float away like leaves carried by a slow, sweet current. There's nothing left for you to do, nothing you need to fix. Every story tonight has been gently preserved, waiting patiently for you to return and taste whenever you need comfort. Let yourself imagine that with each breath you're becoming lighter. The stories linger but gently. The flavors of history are now a part of you, rich, quiet, and deeply yours. There is peace in the unfinished and sweetness in the waiting. Your heartbeat slows. Your thoughts soften. Outside, the moon still rises and falls, the jars still breathe in their silent cellars, and sleep, gentle, inevitable sleep, settles over you, calm as a cool stone. You've wandered far enough for one night. Let go. Rest. Good night.